But first, the French Prime Minister is due to tender his resignation to President Emmanuel Macron. François Bayrou left with little choice after losing Monday's confidence vote in Parliament. Emmanuel Macron says he will be naming Bayrou's replacement in the next couple of days, but whoever steps into his shoes is likely to face a similar fate, with both the far left and far right here in France calling for fresh parliamentary elections.
It's cheers to the government's downfall here in Pau, southwestern France. Residents are out in the streets celebrating the Prime Minister and Mayor of Pau, François Bayrou, losing a vote of confidence from MPs over the budget. Now he and all his government must resign. There are also calls for him to resign as mayor.
François Bayrou is a man who does nothing, who has established himself and accumulated positions of power, resulting in severe austerity measures, declining purchasing power, and widespread dissatisfaction with the system.
In towns and cities all across France, there are parties to say bye-bye Bayrou. People in the western city of Nantes are also out to blame President Emmanuel Macron for the political crisis. For them, he should have nominated a Prime Minister from the left, as it was a left-wing coalition that won the biggest share of seats in Parliament.
It's long overdue for them to put in a Prime Minister from the left-wing alliance, and it hasn't been done. Voilà, it's Macron who did not understand politics.
Macron is searching for his fourth Prime Minister in a year, but he'll find it very difficult to build consensus for a replacement. After snap elections in summer 2024, the country's legislature is fragmented with no clear majority. Some in France are not celebrating the government's collapse. They're concerned by the deepening political crisis, which shows no signs of easing.
I'm waiting to see what happens, if they manage to find someone. But in any case, I don't think it's a very useful decision, and it brings more uncertainty than clarity to French politics today.
The street parties are just ahead of Wednesday's mass protest called Block Everything. The broad anti-government campaign is calling for nationwide disruption.
We can now bring in Nicholas Startin, Associate Professor in Politics and International Relations at John Cabot University, Rome. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Now, President Emmanuel Macron has this reputation for his inability to compromise, one can say. What are the chances he veers to the left when picking a replacement for François Bayrou?
It's certainly a possibility that he would veer to the left in searching for a replacement for Bayrou. There are certainly many people on the left who believe now is the time for the left to be represented in terms of who is Prime Minister. There's a possibility that he might go to the Socialist Party leader Olivier Faure as a possibility. The big problem that Macron faces, though, is not so much the choice of Prime Minister, but rather how is that Prime Minister going to obtain a majority within the French National Assembly. It's one thing to choose a Prime Minister, but the big problem is getting majority support in a parliament that is split in effect three ways between a kind of populist radical left, populist radical right, and Macron's groupings in the centre. How do you command a majority in these circumstances? You know, it was a heavy defeat, 364 to 194 for Bayrou. It's going to be a very, very challenging task, whoever takes over, in terms of coalition building for the next Prime Minister, whether it's somebody from the centre, somebody from the left, or somebody from the kind of more mainstream right.
In the run-up to the last parliamentary polls last year, we saw the left wing come in and form this bloc, NUPS, or New Popular Front. They came out as the largest bloc once the results were known, but the president essentially went and picked someone from the Republican Party with Michel Barnier, then, of course, centre-right François Bayrou. Did that strategy from Emmanuel Macron effectively weaken the left-wing coalition, or did they do it all by themselves?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I think, that there have been some divisions amongst the left about the best way to handle the situation. There's certainly a rump within the Socialist Party that is more inclined to play ball with what's happening in terms of the central political perspective. I mean, you could say the problem started really when Macron decided to have those elections back in 2024. The whole sort of crisis in terms of this notion that it's some kind of existential political and economic crisis kind of stems really from that decision to have that election. It's become much more challenging on all sides for all perspectives. Let's put this into context. We've seen 6 prime ministers already in 1.5 terms of the French president. We have seen some very kind of able centrists come and go, unable to make a case really that it was long term. And this notion of the budget is a massive thing for France at the moment. We're in a situation where the country does have a 3.4 trillion euros debt, a big debt pile in terms of gross domestic product. And yet, the French public do not seem convinced that this is necessarily a massive issue. This could be a very, very difficult time for the president in the next few weeks. I said to you before. Go on,
sorry, I just wanted to jump in there because unsurprisingly, we have the far right National Rally who are calling for new parliamentary polls. That's what they say they are preparing for. Historically in France, there was this consensus amongst the political establishment to do everything to keep the far right from power. But what Emmanuel Macron did last year by picking figures from the conservative right and then François Bayrou, he essentially gave the National Rally a lot of power because they were needed to prop up the government. Is that a fair assessment? And is that what Macron's legacy is going to be, essentially, that he gave the far right this clout here in France?
Well, I think Macron's legacy could well be that he tried to set up centre politics in France, which has never been something that's been big really in the Fifth Republic. But the actual outcome of that is that he's given a lot of energy to the populist radical right, as represented by Le Pen, and also a lot of energy to the populist radical left, as represented by Mélenchon. But the other factor is that his kind of policy outlook and his perspectives have also weakened the traditional centre-left party, the Parti Socialiste, from where Macron emanates, and also the Republican Party is pretty weakened as well compared to where it was historically, the Gaullist Republican Party. And that's partly, I think, due to some of the own internal scandals they've had amongst key political actors. But the legacy, as you call it, of Macron could well be that his party does not really outlive him. And that at the same time, he's weakened the centre-left socialist, partly weakened the Republican right as well, and opened up a vacuum for the populist radical right and the populist radical left. We've got presidential elections in 18 months' time in France, and the only 2 candidates that we really know are going to stand, well, it's either going to be Bardella, or if there's some kind of appeal, Le Pen on the right, it's probably going to be Mélenchon on the left. But nobody really has an idea who is going to stand in the centre as the presidential candidates. There are lots of people who are jockeying for it. None of them want to be prime minister because that might not be a very good take at this stage. French kind of mainstream parliamentary politics is in a mess. And that may well be the legacy of President Macron.
And very briefly, will he go ahead and pick someone like Gérald Darmanin, who was the former interior minister here in France, knowing full well that Darmanin will have his eyes on the presidency 2 years down the line?
Well, he may well try to pick certain people who've also got their eye on the presidency. But if I was a potential presidential candidate for 18 months' time, I don't think I'd necessarily want to be Macron's last prime minister of 7 over a 2-term period. I don't think it's going to help garner anybody votes in that respect. So I think the big players are probably a little bit reticent about maybe becoming prime minister, those on the centre ground, because at the moment, the idea of trying to form a majority seems very, very complex, very, very challenging. And France needs this kind of budget to be kind of formulated. So, yeah, it's real uncharted territory. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We've got this bloc en tout protest movement, grassroots movement, which has grown up online over the last, months or so.
True.
This is, I think, leans to the left. It's not quite like the Gilets jaunes, which I think was a little bit more spontaneous. We've got the trade unions calling for a day of action. We've got 80,000 police about to be deployed across the country. Well, deploying 80,000 police across the country is not going to help reduce France's deficit. If you think about all the overtime.
True. Interesting point, Nicholas Startin. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us on the program today.